Now then, it's time for perspective. And if you think of what France is famous for, you might think of wine, cheese, or perhaps the baguette, or perhaps beautiful beaches and mountains, or, well, if you're in a more pessimistic mood, you might think of demonstrations. Now, living here in Paris, you're almost bound to come across at least one a week, some of the bigger ones attracting thousands and thousands of people from across the country. And that scene is exactly what the government of Emmanuel Macron hopes to avoid as the political term, if you like, begins here again, but with major issues like the cost of living crisis and pension reform on the table. Well, it really seems inevitable that France will soon see major manifs, that's manifestation, or demonstrations, once again soon. Well, let's discuss the political way forward, if you like. And with me here on set is Bruno Cautrès of CEVIPOF, the Political Research Centre of Sciences Po University. Thanks very much for coming in and talking to us once again, Bruno. A lot of talk in countries around the world, hasn't there been, of a winter of discontent? And it really seems as though France is not going to escape that.
No, I don't think so. Actually, when Emmanuel Macron presented his greetings to the French population a year ago, he was talking about a year of all the possibilities for 2022, but actually the possibilities turn into a new crisis with the war in Ukraine, with the inflation undermining the purchasing power of the French, and also with no absolute majority for Macron at the National Assembly. So the situation in France is, like for the rest of Europe, is obviously very difficult on the economic and socio-economic side. But on the top of that, you can add to France this political, situation. Macron has no majority. There is a feeling in the country that the mandate of Macron, the second mandate of Macron, we don't know exactly where Macron wants to go exactly. We have the pension reform, which is now coming very soon. There is no support in the population for the pension reform. You may say eventually that the population is obviously always opposed to this kind of structural reforms. Okay, that's sure. But at the same time, it's not easy to have such a big reform with no consensus and no support in the population.
OK, well, let's talk about lots of those different issues one by one. Let's start off with the cost of living crisis. You mentioned there that it's bad in France. It is bad in France, but let's not forget it's a lot better here than it is in some other countries, notably the UK, but other European countries as well. Do the French perhaps forget that a little bit? I mean, inflation's running at around 6%, I think.
Certainly. With the COVID, actually, the French could hope it is the end of the crisis, particularly with the comparative advantage of France, the whatever it cost of Emmanuel Macron. But actually, for France, we have not lost the hopes. We have not lost the perspective that France is still having a specific model, that we are not exactly like in the rest of Europe. We have social protection. The French are extremely attached to that. And despite all the government policies supporting the French, supporting the companies, there is that feeling in the population that we have a very difficult prospect, that we don't know exactly if it is the end of an old world, if it is the new world. But what is that new world? Why do we have so much difficulties? Why France is in a state of permanent crisis since the Yellow Vest? We've got the Yellow Vest, the COVID, the Ukraine, the inflation. It's just too much.
But the Ukraine crisis is not a crisis caused within France, is it?
No.
It's something that's come from outside.
Yes, obviously it is an external shock, but it creates new difficulties. And so in France, we have this feeling also that politics do not respond. They do respond, obviously, but the subjective feeling is that the politics do not respond, do not understand the difficulties of ordinary citizens. And the lack of trust in the politics is very high in France. It is among the highest countries for political distrust. The popularity of Macron is average, 35 to 40, which is not too much. So we have this situation which is a bit explosive.
And as you mentioned there, on top of all of that, the Macron government, back in 2017, of course, Macron really was pushing his pension reform, and the whole thing got put off because of coronavirus. Now he's sort of got to push it again, really, because he hasn't got that much long left in his term, presumably only another roughly 4 years. But it's coming right on top of the cost of living crisis, which inevitably is going to be like an extra thing, if you like, which could well get people out on the streets demonstrating and make people very angry.
That's true. We are not sure what form could take the mobilization. It is not sure that people are going to demonstrate in the streets. Over the last years, we have seen the difficulties of the trade unions to mobilize, and most of the biggest mobilization in France were actually outside the trade unions, the Yellow Vest, for instance. Okay, so but what we do know is that there is absolutely not one single trade union which is supporting the pension reform system. Eventually, Macron could get a political majority in the assembly if he's going on the right, and because the right-wing party is actually supporting the Macron reform.
So he'll push it through.
So yes, certainly I think that there will be somewhere a compromise between the Macron government and the right-wing party. So the political majority could be there. But the social majority, which is public opinion accepting, is not there. People have there is a certain kind of fatality. People are looking to that like it is inevitable, obviously. But the main point is that Macron do not explain what is the social philosophy of that reform. It is only presented to the French as a budgetary issue. We need to save the budget of the pension system. But there is not the philosophy of that. Working more, working longer, but what for exactly?
But again, I mean, French people perhaps haven't, as we mentioned earlier, to do with the cost of living crisis. Of course, the inflation is a lot lower here. So is the retirement age. I mean, if you look at the UK, we're up at 67, and a lot of other countries, Germany is higher. 62 is actually very, very young, isn't it?
That's true. When we are looking to, if you are looking to the other countries, we are certainly on today one of the few countries where the pension reform, when the pension age is so low, 62. Okay, but we do need an explanation to work longer, but what to do exactly? You said work older, but what exactly to do? Can you get an increase of salaries on the last years? Can you get new perspective, new professional perspective? So what is lacking is an explanation of what kind of society are we going to if we are working longer. It can't be only a budgetary issue because it talks about work, it talks about your position in the society, and it can't be just a budgetary issue.
We're going to have to wait and see exactly what comes out when the details start emerging. It's a week's time, isn't it, that the final text, if you like, will come out.
Yes, there is still discussions between the executive, the trade unions, civil society, the political parties. But most of the time when the political party leaders or the trade union leaders are getting out the office of the Prime Minister, they said, okay, we talk, but we have the feeling that the decisions are made already.
Bruno Cautrès, thanks very much for coming in and talking to us from CEVIPOF there, the Political Research Centre of Sciences Po.